Well, I think the slim down was said in a day when there were a few more people around to make that seem like a justifiable
Right.
comment.
On a seemingly ordinary royal morning, a single jewel quietly set in motion events that no one in the palace corridors could have anticipated. The Jubilee Brooch, heavy not only with gemstones, but with decades of history and silent authority, changed hands in a moment that resonated far beyond the eyes of those who witnessed it. Princess Anne's decision to place it with Catherine was deliberate, layered with meaning, and impossible to ignore. What truly astonished those present, however, was who was denied the honour of that gesture and what that omission silently conveyed about loyalty, legacy, and the future of the crown. Whispers lingered in hallways and antechambers, faint but persistent. Camilla's claim to wear the brooch had been quietly, yet unmistakably refused. It sparked conversations behind closed doors about allegiance, inheritance, and the subtle assertion of authority within the monarchy's intricate hierarchy. Was this a mere personal choice, or a message encoded in tradition, signalling who would steer the future? Late in 2022, while the nation continued adjusting to life after Queen Elizabeth II, a quieter and more profound reckoning was unfolding beneath Buckingham Palace, far below the glittering grand state rooms. Behind the vault's reinforced steel doors, within climate-controlled walls that hummed softly with the assurance of preservation, the royal jewel collection lay in stillness, untouched yet heavy with history. It was here that Princess Anne arrived on an overcast morning, carrying neither ceremonial fanfare nor public expectation, but the measured authority of someone entrusted with the stewardship of the crown's legacy. Her presence was purposeful, informed by memory, duty, and a profound understanding of symbolism that extended beyond surface appearances. Dressed with understated simplicity, Anne moved past rows of velvet-lined drawers, each containing artifacts that had marked coronations, jubilees, weddings, and decades of service. The air was thick with quiet reverence, each step echoing softly across the polished stone floors. This was far from her first visit since her mother's passing. In September 2022, as the meticulous review of Queen Elizabeth II's collection continued, Anne had assumed a central role, not as a formal representative, but guided equally by recollection and responsibility. Every drawer she opened carried weight, yet one drew her attention immediately. Inside a dark velvet case lay the Jubilee Brooch. Its central sapphire gleamed deep and unwavering, catching the subdued light of the vault. Framed by a floral pattern of diamonds, symbolizing unity across the realms. Anne lifted it carefully, feeling its familiar heft in her hand. This was no ordinary jewel. It had marked 1977, the Silver Jubilee, when Elizabeth had appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony, smiling at a sea of citizens who had filled the mall, and again in 2002, when it had been enhanced with additional sapphires to commemorate 50 years on the throne. This brooch, Anne knew, contained more than gemstones. It contained the essence of a reign. Recently, she had become aware that interest in the brooch had surfaced elsewhere. Camilla, now Queen Consort, had mentioned it privately, proposing it would be a fitting tribute to Elizabeth's jubilees. It was not an unreasonable thought. Anne considered it briefly, weighing intent against tradition, but her focus returned swiftly to the vault, the brooch cradled in her palm. This was not a matter of personal preference or status. It was a matter of direction and foresight, understanding the distinction between merely wearing history and actively carrying it forward. Certain pieces in the royal collection were never meant to circulate freely. They followed invisible lines dictated by tradition rather than title. The Jubilee Brooch, created to mark Elizabeth's milestones and worn at defining moments of her reign, belonged unmistakably to that category. As Anne returned the brooch to its velvet case, memories surfaced unbidden, her mother adjusting it before public appearances, noting its weight and balance, speaking softly about its meaning. Elizabeth had always known which symbols mattered most, and why. Anne felt that understanding settled firmly within her, a compass guiding her decision. This choice required no debate, no formal approval. It demanded only alignment with the Queen's enduring vision for the monarchy. By the time the vault drawer closed, Anne's resolve was complete. The Jubilee brooch would not linger in the present. It would journey with the future of the crown, with the woman destined to stand where Elizabeth had stood. As Anne walked back through the palace corridors, each step carried a quiet authority, a subtle reminder that some decisions ripple across generations, even without announcement. The implications of Anne's decision moved silently through the palace. Not long after she left the vault, she learned of a conversation that had occurred at Clarence House between King Charles III and Camilla. The setting had been ordinary, a calm afternoon tea, but the subject was weighty. Camilla had expressed her desire to honour Elizabeth's legacy by wearing the brooch. Charles had listened with understanding, recognising both her intent and the care with which she approached her role. Yet the suggestion lingered quietly, moving through palace channels until it reached Anne. Anne's response was measured. There was no anger, no judgment of Camilla's intentions. Instead, she considered history, precedent, and the lessons learned from decades of observing how symbols were passed down. The Jubilee brooch was not a piece to be assigned lightly. Historically, some jewels circulated among many, while others followed a direct line, tied explicitly to the future of the monarchy. This brooch, created for Elizabeth's silver jubilee and enhanced for her golden jubilee, was one such artifact. It carried within it the defining moments of a reign, a testament to continuity and duty. Its meaning stretched forward, not sideways. Anne did not summon Camilla, nor confront Charles. Her authority was quiet but absolute, drawn from clarity and understanding. The brooch belonged with the future queen consort, Catherine, not the present. By holding this interpretation, Anne quietly redrew a boundary that had never been formally written, yet had always been understood. Her decision was not a rejection of Camilla, but a reinforcement of the principle that symbols of the crown sometimes transcend personal claim. As palace life carried on around her, the brooch remained in place, its message unmistakable to those attuned to tradition. Anne had chosen continuity over courtesy, ensuring the story of the Jubilee brooch would continue along the line it was always meant to follow. It was a jewel that measured time, memory, and authority. It was never about adornment alone. It was about legacy. To understand why Princess Anne's decision felt so resolved rather than shocking, one must look closely at the brooch itself. Its value never lay merely in sparkle. From its creation in 1977, the brooch was designed to carry the weight of time, the memory of milestones, and the meaning of service in a way few royal jewels ever do. Britain, emerging from post-war decades, marked Elizabeth's 25 years on the throne with a silver jubilee designed to reassure, celebrate, and unify. The Crown commissioned Gerard and Company, London's historic royal jeweller, to craft a piece worthy of the occasion. The result? A central oval sapphire, deep and unwavering, encircled by diamonds in a floral pattern, with subtle gold accents woven throughout. Every element symbolized something: endurance, calm, unity, and duty. On June 7th, 1977, the brooch entered public memory when Elizabeth appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony, photographs capturing a monarch poised, confident, and visibly connected to her people. Over the decades, it became one of her most personal pieces, worn not only at public events, but at family gatherings and moments of quiet reflection. Those close to her remembered her sometimes adjusting the brooch, noting its weight and balance, treating it not merely as a jewel, but as a familiar companion imbued with meaning. A soft grey dawn stretched across the grounds of Buckingham Palace, and with it came a quiet reminder of duty and history, as one jewel quietly carried decades of expectation and meaning. The Jubilee brooch, heavy with more than gems and precious metals, carried within it a living chronicle of service, a story that had begun in 1977, marked at 2002, and was now poised to shape the path of the monarchy in ways unseen. As Elizabeth celebrated 50 years on the throne, the brooch had been carefully updated, additional sapphires integrated into the design without disturbing its identity, enhancing rather than altering its message. It had deepened over time. Once, it marked a single milestone, a silver jubilee celebrated with cheering crowds and grand processions. Now, it carried two, encapsulating 25 and 50 years in a single piece. a visual record of service, continuity, and unwavering devotion. Elizabeth wore it at Windsor Castle and Balmoral, often during quieter, more personal gatherings, where the grandeur of public attention was replaced by familial intimacy. The brooch had grown rare in both meaning and form, tracing the arc of a reign silently, eloquently, and without fanfare. To Elizabeth, it was never just an ornament. It was a symbol of constancy, a reminder of responsibilities kept and promises made. She spoke of it with familiarity, sometimes recounting the excitement of 1977, other times recalling the calm pride of 2002. Each reflection circled back to the same principle: service above self. The Jubilee brooch was never destined for casual reassignment. It functioned not as a marker of fashion or favour, but as a timeline of succession and stability, an artefact whose value lay in its symbolic weight rather than its sparkle. Years later, as Princess Anne weighed its future, the inevitability of a choice became apparent. The brooch did not belong to fleeting moments. It belonged to the long road ahead, carrying the story of a reign forward, waiting to rest where that story would continue rather than simply conclude. And yet, even in the vaults of Buckingham Palace, Anne knew this was more than a decision about a jewel. It was about legacy, authority, and the invisible threads connecting the past to the future. Who would inherit its hidden power? Whose responsibility would it signify next? By late October 2022, the mood inside Buckingham Palace had shifted. Mourning had gradually given way to responsibility, and the jewel vault, tucked beneath the grand state rooms, became the quiet epicentre of that transition. On a grey morning, Princess Anne returned, not for ceremony, but for clarity. She passed beneath silent corridors lined with portraits and tapestries that had witnessed generations of monarchs, the weight of history pressing down as lightly and persistently as the filtered morning light. The vault itself was a sanctuary of precision. Reinforced doors held back the world outside. The air was carefully controlled. Silence reigned, broken only by the soft movement of gloved hands and the faint click of drawers opening and closing. Waiting for her was Eleanor Hargrove, the long-serving keeper of the jewels, her ledger tucked under one arm, reading glasses perched low on her nose. Her presence was quiet, meticulous, but steady, the embodiment of years spent understanding that every jewel, every clasp and hinge carried its own story. Eleanor guided the process with exacting precision, cataloguing each piece, inspecting and recording its state, following procedures refined over generations. Nothing was rushed, nothing was casual. This was not a simple inventory, it was an accounting of history, a careful acknowledgement of the monarchy's visual and symbolic legacy. Anne moved slowly, her gaze steady, absorbing the stories each jewel carried before they were even named. Some pieces recalled state banquets at Windsor, crystal glasses clinking beneath chandeliers, conversations echoing with protocol and ceremony. Others brought forth memories of Balmoral, quieter and more personal, where jewellery was worn not for display but for familiarity, threaded into moments shared with those closest to the Queen. Drawers slid open, and the echoes of rehearsal and anticipation for Jubilees returned unbidden. The careful adjustments of gowns, the guidance from Elizabeth's own hand, the deliberate placement of a brooch to reflect continuity, grace, and authority. When the Jubilee brooch appeared, resting once more in its dark velvet case, the atmosphere changed. Anne paused, lifting it carefully, feeling the familiar balance and weight in her hand. The sapphire caught the muted vault light, steady and unchanging, while her mind carried her across decades, to Windsor during preparations for the Silver Jubilee of 1977, to the quiet reflections of Balmoral in 2002. She could almost hear her mother's voice, calm and practical, directing aids, ensuring that the brooch rested perfectly against the fabric. Eleanor recorded the details in her ledger, her pen moving with unwavering rhythm. She understood when silence was required. Anne's grip tightened slightly, not from uncertainty, but from recognition. This moment carried weight beyond preservation or record-keeping. Until then, the Vault Review had been about ensuring the collection was protected, stored, and documented. But now, The brooch's presence conveyed something different. It was about where its meaning would live. Elizabeth had been clear about symbols. Some were worn freely, allowed to evolve with fashion or circumstance. Others carried purpose deeper than ornamentation, meant to anchor and steady the monarchy itself. The Jubilee brooch belonged to that second category. It did not merely reflect the past. It pointed forward, deliberate and forward-looking. Anne closed the velvet case with careful hands, fully aware that the choice before her was not administrative. It was personal, historical, and inescapably about the future. Whoever carried this brooch next would inherit more than history. They would inherit expectation. As Anne moved to the next drawer, the vault felt different. The weight she bore was no longer only her mother's absence, but the responsibility of deciding who would embody her presence in the years to come. The path ahead grew clearer, though not easier. She understood the legacy she had been entrusted to uphold, and that legacy demanded foresight, not haste. By May 2023, the months of quiet deliberation reached their moment of action. The setting was Kensington Palace, chosen not for pomp but for meaning. The Oak Room, warm and familiar, long a haven for private family moments, now hosted a meeting of profound consequence. Soft daylight filtered through tall windows, casting amber light across polished wood panels and antique furnishings. Spring had fully arrived, and with it Catherine, Princess of Wales, entered the room. Her composure was understated, her attire simple yet elegant, entirely appropriate for a private, weighty encounter. Her posture was relaxed, yet attentive. She understood intuitively that this was not an occasion for words, but for presence. William stood nearby, a quiet reassurance, understanding the unspoken gravity of the moment. Princess Anne entered shortly thereafter, steady as she had been since her mother's passing. No notes, no formality in her hands, only a small navy velvet case, unmistakable in its significance. Inside rested the Jubilee brooch. Its presence was felt rather than announced. There were no speeches, no ceremony. Anne's expression was calm, measured, shaped by duty rather than sentiment. She spoke directly, precisely, explaining that the Queen's collection was never about decoration alone. Each piece carried purpose, responsibility, and expectation. When Anne opened the case, the brooch caught the light immediately, sapphire deep and diamonds radiant, unchanged by decades. Catherine stepped forward without hesitation. Anne pinned the brooch with careful, almost reverent hands, adjusting it as Elizabeth herself would have done. The gesture spoke volumes. The brooch would not pass through the present role of Queen Consort. It would move directly to the woman destined to carry the crown forward. Camilla and King Charles arrived shortly after, their expressions neutral, acknowledging without dispute. Camilla's composure and graciousness reflected understanding, not contestation. Charles offered a small gesture of approval, recognizing the continuity Anne had preserved. The room softened as conversation shifted to memories of Elizabeth's jubilees. Laughter surfaced, reflections were shared, yet the significance of the transfer remained clear. The line of succession had been quietly, decisively reinforced. Later, as Catherine adjusted the brooch on her lapel, its presence felt less like honour and more like responsibility. Anne, watching, understood fully that her choice in the vault months earlier had become visible, irreversible, and firmly set into the future. Life in the palace resumed its rhythm, outwardly unchanged, yet beneath the calm surface, the quiet shift had begun to shape the monarchy's next chapter. Those attuned to the unspoken language of the royal household knew something profound had settled into place. In the quiet corridors and service rooms of Kensington and Buckingham Palaces, life moved with the measured rhythm of centuries of tradition, the soft echo of polished silverware, the subtle scent of freshly laundered linens, the faint rustle of carefully arranged flowers. It all proceeded as if nothing had changed. Yet beneath this ordinary routine, a subtle awareness lingered. Staff exchanged brief glances as they carried out their duties. A housekeeper paused slightly longer than usual while arranging a table, murmuring to a colleague that Princess Anne had once again performed her role with the precision and care that had defined her entire life, keeping faith with tradition. A senior footman, careful with his words as always, remarked in a low tone that the brooch now rested exactly where it belonged. These were not rumours or idle chatter. They were quiet acknowledgements shaped by experience and an intimate understanding of palace life. Transitions had come and gone across decades, yet this one bore a distinct mark of deliberate continuity. The staff knew that something significant had shifted and that it had been done not with fanfare, but with an authority rooted in history. Later that evening, in the private family quarters of Kensington Palace, William and Catherine found themselves alone in the soft glow of the nursery. The lights cast a warm, amber hue across polished wooden floors and plush carpets. From down the corridor came the gentle laughter and soft footsteps of their children, a comforting reminder of life moving forward, even as the weight of tradition pressed upon them. Catherine reached for the brooch once more, her fingers lingering on the cool sapphire and the surrounding diamonds, feeling not its weight in ounces, but the gravity of its history and the responsibility it symbolized. William watched her quietly, his expression thoughtful and restrained. "It's not just a piece of jewelry," he said softly. "It's a signal, a sign of trust, of confidence in what we're building. For George, Charlotte, Louis, and the future of the monarchy." Catherine nodded, her eyes following the intricate details of the sapphire. "I understand," she said. "It's a responsibility as much as it is an honour. It reminds us that everything we do carries meaning, not just for us, but for those who come after." That night, Princess Anne began the long drive back to Gatcombe Park. The countryside rolled out before her, familiar and grounding, providing a quiet counterpoint to the intensity of the day. Her thoughts wandered to conversations with her mother, Queen Elizabeth II, about the nature of royal possessions. Elizabeth had always been clear. These objects were never truly owned in the conventional sense. They were entrusted to the family, held with care, safeguarded, and passed on deliberately, each piece a marker of history and duty. Anne felt certain she had followed that guidance. At Clarence House, Camilla received news of the brooch's placement with calm acceptance. She did not question the decision, nor allow any disappointment to surface. Years of navigating public scrutiny, personal ambition, and the delicate balance of public expectation had honed her understanding of the distinction between personal sentiment and institutional responsibility. The Jubilee brooch had found its rightful place, and she accepted it with grace. In the days following, she continued her public engagements, wearing jewels long associated with her own role, distinct, significant, but not challenging the symbolic line that had just been reinforced. Outwardly, nothing seemed to have changed. No statements were released, no explanations given. Privately, however, a subtle realignment of roles had occurred. Catherine's position as the future queen consort had been quietly reinforced. Princess Anne's role as guardian of continuity and tradition had been reaffirmed. Camilla's acceptance of the situation demonstrated stability rather than rivalry. Within the palace, the absence of confrontation spoke louder than any public announcement could. The monarchy had moved forward without fracture, guided by respect, history, and an unspoken understanding of duty. The quiet reverberations of that gesture slowly began to manifest publicly. In June 2023, Buckingham Palace held one of its grand garden parties, a tradition steeped in pomp, protocol, and history. The lawns were filled with more than 8,000 guests, each carefully managed and guided through the vast grounds. The air was thick with the fragrance of roses and freshly cut grass, the sound of murmured conversations blending with the distant hum of ceremonial bands. Catherine, Princess of Wales, moved among the crowd with serene composure, her demeanour calm, yet unmistakably aware of the symbolism she now carried. Pinned to her pale blue silk outfit was the Jubilee brooch, its deep sapphire catching the sunlight. Those who knew its history immediately understood the significance. There was no announcement, No explanation from palace officials, yet the message was clear. The brooch had returned to its rightful line. It was a quiet but potent signal of continuity and the transfer of responsibility. Commentators and historians alike noticed. The brooch had not appeared publicly on any other royal since Elizabeth II's passing, making its appearance on Catherine's lapel deliberate and unmistakable. Catherine moved through the party with a natural elegance, greeting guests with warmth and attentiveness. Her composure lent a sense of continuity to the event. The brooch was no longer simply a piece of jewellery. It had become a bridge between past and future, between Elizabeth's reign and the responsibilities Catherine would one day bear. The subtlety of its placement carried more weight than any formal declaration could. It was tradition, history, and authority communicated without a single spoken word. Just days later, the brooch made another appearance on an even larger stage, Trooping the Colour, June 2023. The streets of London were lined with thousands, the mall thrumming with anticipation. Millions more watched worldwide as the royal family appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony, a scene deeply intertwined with memories of Elizabeth II's jubilees. Catherine stood beside William, the children close, embodying the continuity of monarchy in both image and presence. The Jubilee brooch glimmered against her tailored pale blue coat, visually connecting her to the same balcony where Elizabeth had marked decades of service. The public's response was immediate, though tempered by understanding. Newspapers and online media highlighted the brooch as a symbol of continuity, noting the deliberate and thoughtful timing of its reappearance. Across social media, comparisons were drawn between Catherine and archival images of Elizabeth wearing the brooch in 1977 and 2002. The visual link was powerful, the past and future of the monarchy expressed in a single, silent gesture. Later that year, in the grand setting of a state dinner at Windsor Castle in autumn 2023, the brooch appeared once again. Catherine arrived in an emerald evening gown, the Jubilee brooch prominently displayed at her shoulder. Diplomats, dignitaries, and senior royal officials noted its presence, the familiar sapphire now fully integrated into the visual lexicon of succession and continuity. Publications like Vogue highlighted the craftsmanship and timeless elegance of the piece, while The Guardian described it as a subtle affirmation of the monarchy's forward-looking line of succession. Throughout these events, Camilla continued to wear jewels traditionally linked to her role, maintaining a quiet dignity that reinforced the non-confrontational nature of the transfer. There was contrast, certainly, but not conflict. Each woman's adornments reflected her position, authority, and responsibilities. Princess Anne's careful orchestration of the brooch's placement had achieved exactly what she intended, a seamless, silent reinforcement of continuity. By the end of 2023, the message of the Jubilee brooch had settled firmly in place. It no longer belonged solely to the memory of Elizabeth II. It had become a living symbol, connecting past milestones with future responsibility. The quiet transfer, invisible to those unfamiliar with the subtleties of royal life, carried authority, expectation, and tradition. Its presence on Catherine's lapel was more than ceremonial. It was instructive, a reminder that history moves forward carefully, deliberately, and with purpose. The brooch had always measured time, but now it marked direction. It was a sign that the monarchy, guided by history, loyalty, and foresight, could maintain stability while preparing for the generations yet to come. A single object, carried with care, had communicated more than words ever could. And so, as Catherine continued to wear the Jubilee brooch through public appearances and private engagements, the weight of history remained palpable. Each glance at the sapphire and surrounding diamonds reminded her, and those who observed, that continuity is maintained not through announcements, but through deliberate actions, guided by duty and anchored in tradition. So, what do you think this quiet, deliberate transfer of the Jubilee brooch really means? Could it signal power, responsibility, and loyalty in ways the public rarely sees? Does it hint at the subtle ways the monarchy prepares for the future, beyond headlines and ceremonies? Share your thoughts below, and if you enjoyed this detailed look behind the palace walls, please like, comment, and subscribe to follow the story as it continues to unfold. Because in the world of royals, history is always in motion, and the smallest gesture can shape the future in profound ways.